I thought my dad saved us the night my mom died. That's what he told me. It was an accident. But years later, I found her message. If anything happens to me, it's him. I asked him, casually, and he didn't even hesitate. He just said, she wasn't taking you away. I didn't react when he said it. That's the part that still sits with me. I didn't pause long enough for it to feel like something was wrong. I just nodded like it made sense, like it was a normal answer to a normal question. But it wasn't normal. And somewhere deep down, I think I knew that even then. Growing up, my dad, Daniel Moore, wasn't the kind of man anyone questioned. He was reliable in a way that made everything feel stable. He showed up. He handled things. People trusted him without thinking about it. My mom, Sarah Moore, was different. She wasn't loud or dramatic. If anything, she was careful. The kind of person who chose her words slowly, like she was always thinking one step ahead of what could go wrong. When I was younger, I used to hear them at night. Not yelling. That's the thing, there was never anything obvious. No slammed doors. No shouting matches. Just quiet conversations in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. Low voices. Tight pauses. Sometimes I'd stand in the hallway listening, trying to catch a full sentence. But I never could. It was always just fragments. Then the next morning, everything would be normal again. Breakfast. Coffee. My dad asking me about school. My mom smiling like nothing had happened. It made it easy to ignore. Because if nothing looks broken, you don't think to fix it. When my mom died, I was 16. My dad told me she'd been drinking. Said she slipped. Said it was one of those things you don't see coming until it's already over. I remember how calm he was when he explained it. Not cold. Not distant. Just controlled. At the time, I thought that meant he was strong. Now I think it meant he had already decided how the story was going to sound. After that, everything narrowed down to just the two of us. And something changed. He didn't become overbearing. He didn't get strict or angry. If anything, he became closer. Too close, in a way I didn't recognize back then. You're all I have now, Jess, he'd say. We got through this together. It made me feel like I mattered in a way I hadn't before. Like I wasn't just his daughter anymore, I was part of something bigger. Something only the two of us understood. And when you're grieving, that kind of connection feels like safety. So I stayed close. I chose Bloomington instead of going out of state. Told myself it was about money, about practicality. But really, it was because leaving felt wrong. Like I'd be abandoning him. Even in college, I came home almost every weekend. If I didn't, he'd call. Not in a demanding way. Just enough to remind me he was there. Waiting. When I graduated and got a job in Indianapolis, nothing really changed. I still stopped by after work. Still helped with things around the house. Still covered bills when he mentioned things were tight. He never asked directly. He didn't have to. There was always this quiet weight behind everything. Like leaving would make me ungrateful. Like distance would mean I didn't care about what we'd been through. And for a long time, I didn't question it. The first real shift didn't feel big. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a box in the garage. I was looking for old tax documents, nothing important, and I came across a storage bin labeled with my mom's name. I almost left it alone. I should have. But I opened it. Inside were printed emails. At first, I thought they were just old conversations. Work stuff. Maybe things she had saved for no real reason. But the tone felt off. Careful. Like every word had been chosen to avoid something. I kept reading. And then I saw it. I can't stay here anymore. I'm scared of what he'll do if I try to leave with her. I read it again. Slower. With her. That was me. I remember sitting down right there on the garage floor, holding that paper like it was going to explain itself if I waited long enough. It didn't. Nothing about it fit the version of my dad I had in my head. So I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I put everything back exactly how I found it. And I said nothing. But after that, I started paying attention. After that day in the garage, nothing looked the same, even though everything technically was. My dad didn't change. That was the problem. He still made coffee the same way every morning. Still asked me how work was. Still fixed things around the house before I even noticed they were broken. If anything, he felt even more normal. But now I was watching. Not as his daughter. As someone trying to figure out what was real. The first thing I noticed was how he handled distance. A few days after I found the emails, I mentioned, casually, that someone at work had transferred to Chicago. Better pay. Better opportunities. I wasn't even saying I wanted to go. I just said it. He went quiet for a second. Not long. Just enough to feel it. Then he smiled and said, that's good for them. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because a minute later, he added, I just don't get why people leave when they've already got everything they need. It wasn't directed at me. Not directly. But it landed exactly where it was supposed to. I laughed it off. Changed the subject. But that sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. That's how he did it. Nothing obvious. Nothing you could point at and say, that's controlling. Just small things that made you second-guess your own decisions. A week later, I didn't come home on Sunday. It was the first time in years. I told myself it was normal. I had work early Monday. I was tired. I didn't need to make the drive. He called around 9 p.m. I let it ring once. Then twice. Then I picked up. "Hey," I said. There was a pause on his end. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just stayed in Indy this weekend." Another pause. "You didn't think to tell me?" It wasn't angry. That's what made it worse. I just figured it wasn't a big deal. He let out a small breath. "I just worry, Jess. After everything. I don't like not knowing where you are." There it was again. After everything. I said I'd come by next weekend. And just like that, everything was fine again. But now I was hearing it differently. Every sentence had weight. Every pause felt intentional. I started paying attention to the past too. Little memories that didn't seem important before started coming back in pieces. Like the time my mom had packed a suitcase. I must have been 13 or 14. I remember walking into their bedroom and seeing it sitting on the bed. Not fully packed, just started. Clothes folded. A few things missing from her dresser. I asked her if we were going somewhere. She smiled too quickly and said, "Just organizing." Later that night, the suitcase was gone. I never saw it again. At the time, I didn't question it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started noticing patterns. How my mom used to hesitate before answering my dad. How she'd glance at him before making small decisions, like what we were having for dinner or whether we were going out. It wasn't fear. Not obvious fear. But it wasn't normal either. I thought about the emails again. The wording. I'm scared of what he'll do. Not what he might say. Not how he'd react. What he'd do. That word stayed with me. I went back into the garage a few days later when he was at work. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled the box out, sat down, and went through everything carefully. There were more emails. Some from Jennifer Brown, her coworker. They talked about things that sounded small on the surface: stress, feeling stuck, not knowing what to do. But underneath it, there was something heavier. One message read, "I think he knows I'm serious this time." Another said, "If I leave, I have to do it all at once." There were no direct accusations. No clear explanation. Just fear, wrapped in careful words. I checked the dates. Most of them were from a few weeks before she died. That made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Because if she was planning to leave, then that night wasn't random. It couldn't be. I kept digging. There was an old laptop in the basement that barely worked. It took me almost an hour to get it to turn on. Most of the files were corrupted or outdated, but I found a few things. Old bank statements. Call logs. Nothing that proved anything. But enough to make the timeline feel wrong. There were calls made late that night. Numbers I didn't recognize. Gaps that didn't match the version of events my dad had told me. And, the biggest thing, there was nothing anywhere that confirmed she had been drinking. No hospital note. No mention in any official document I could find. Just his word. And I had accepted that as fact for years. That realization hit harder than anything else. Because it meant the entire story I built my life around came from one person. And I never questioned it. I didn't go to the police. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell Matthew, even though he was the one person who would have listened without judging me. I stayed quiet. And I stayed close. Because at that point, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just needed to hear it from him. Not in a report. Not in documents. From him. So I kept doing what I had always done. I showed up. I sat across from him at dinner. I asked questions, but gently. Carefully. Like I was just remembering things out loud. "Do you remember that night? Were you scared? Did she say anything before it happened?" At first, nothing changed. Same answers. Same tone. Same story. But the more comfortable he got, the more the details started to shift. And I realized something. He wasn't trying to confess. He just didn't think he needed to hide it anymore. Once I realized he wasn't really hiding anything anymore, everything shifted again. Not suddenly. Not in a way you could point to and say, "That's the moment." It was quieter than that. Like something had been unlocked, and now it was just a matter of how much I was willing to see. I started asking more direct questions, but still in a way that didn't feel like confrontation. More like curiosity. One evening, I was at the house, sitting at the kitchen table while he rinsed dishes. I said, "Do you think she was unhappy for a long time?" He didn't turn around right away. Just kept rinsing the same plate a little longer than necessary. Then he said, "She didn't appreciate what she had." Not angry. Just certain. I let a few seconds pass. "What do you mean?" He shrugged slightly, like it wasn't worth explaining. Some people don't know how to be satisfied. That word stayed with me. Satisfied. Like happiness was something she failed at. I didn't push it further that night. But I noticed something else. He didn't look uncomfortable talking about her anymore. Before, anytime her name came up, there was this controlled sadness. Like he was performing grief in a way that felt appropriate. Now, it was different. detached. Like he was talking about someone who had made a series of bad decisions. A few days later, I ran into Nancy Walker. She lived 2 houses down from us. She'd been there as long as I could remember. The kind of neighbor who always waved, always knew what was going on without ever being directly involved. She stopped me while I was getting into my car. "Haven't seen you around as much," she said. "Work's been busy," I told her. She nodded, then hesitated. "Your mom used to talk about moving, you know." My stomach tightened. I kept my face neutral. "Moving where?" She shrugged. "Didn't say exactly. Just, away." I forced a small smile. "Yeah, I don't think that was ever serious." Nancy studied me for a second. Not in a judgmental way. More like she was deciding how much to say. "She seemed serious to me," she said quietly. "Toward the end. Toward the end." That phrase echoed in my head long after I left. Because it matched everything I had found. Everything I wasn't supposed to know. That night, I stayed longer than usual. We sat in the living room, the TV on low, neither of us really watching it. I decided to push a little further. Not enough to scare him. Just enough. "Did you ever think she would actually leave?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "She talked about it." My chest tightened. I kept my tone even. "Like, seriously?" He leaned back slightly, eyes still on the TV. "People say things when they're emotional." "That's not what I asked." That slipped out before I could soften it. He glanced at me then. Not angry, but sharp. "She wasn't thinking clearly," he said. There it was again. Rewriting her. Making her the unstable one. I swallowed, then asked, "Were you worried she'd take me with her?" That's when everything changed. He didn't answer right away. And this time, the silence felt different. He turned the volume down on the TV. Looked at me directly. And for the first time, it felt like he was actually seeing me. Not as his daughter, but as someone asking a question he hadn't expected. "She wouldn't have taken care of you," he said. It wasn't what I asked. I held his gaze. "That's not the same thing." Another pause. Then he said, quieter this time, "You don't understand what she was like." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Then explain it to me." For a second, I thought he wouldn't. Thought he'd shut it down, redirect, do what he always did. But he didn't. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. "She was going to leave," he said. The words landed heavier than I expected. "With you." I didn't move. Didn't react. Just listened. "She thought she could just walk away," he continued. "Take you, start over somewhere else, like none of this mattered." His voice wasn't raised. It was controlled. Measured. Like he was explaining something logical. "She wasn't thinking about you," he added. "Not really." I felt my hands go cold. "Then who is she thinking about?" I asked. He shook his head slightly, like it was obvious. "Herself." That word hit harder than anything else. Because it sounded like something he had told himself enough times that it became truth. I should have stopped there. I should have changed the subject. But I didn't. Because I needed to hear it. All of it. "So what happened that night?" I asked. The room went completely still. Even the low hum of the TV felt too loud. He didn't answer right away. And, for the first time, I felt something close to fear. Not because of what he might do, but because of what he might say. He exhaled slowly. "She pushed things too far." That was it. That was the closest thing to an explanation. No details. No emotion. Just a line that carried everything underneath it. I nodded. Like I understood. Like it made sense. But inside, everything was shifting into place. Because he wasn't denying anything. He wasn't correcting me. He was just adjusting the story. And then, like it was nothing, he added, "I couldn't let her take you away from me." Same tone. Same calm. Like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. And that was the moment it stopped being a question. I didn't say anything after that. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't push for details. I didn't react the way I think most people expect someone to react when they hear something like that. I just sat there. And nodded. Like it made sense. Like it was something I had always known, and he was just finally saying it out loud. But inside, everything felt quiet. Not chaotic. Not emotional. Just still. Because once you hear something like that, there's no more guessing. No more wondering if you misunderstood something or filled in the blanks the wrong way. It just is. And the version of your life you've been carrying doesn't fit anymore. I stayed for a little while longer that night. We talked about normal things. Work. The weather. Small, empty conversations that felt completely disconnected from what had just happened. And he acted exactly the same. That was the part one couldn't shake. No guilt. No hesitation. No second thought. Just normal. When I left, he told me to drive safe. Like always. I remember sitting in my car for a few minutes before starting it. Just staring at the steering wheel, trying to feel something that matched what I had just heard. But nothing came. Not right away. The next few weeks were quiet. I didn't cut him off immediately. I didn't disappear. I didn't make any big moves. I just created space. Small at first. I skipped a visit. Then another. When he called, I didn't always pick up. And when I did, I kept the conversation short. Polite. Controlled. He noticed. Of course he did. At first, he kept it subtle. You've been busy lately. I haven't seen you in a while. Then it shifted. I thought we were closer than this, Jess. That one almost got me. Almost. Because that was the version of him I had spent my whole life responding to. The one who made distance feel like betrayal. But now, it just felt like pressure. And I saw it for what it was. A few days later, he called again. I answered. You're pulling away, he said. Not accusing. Just stating it. I've just been busy, I replied. A pause. Then, softer, you're all I have. That used to mean something. It used to feel heavy. Important. Like I was responsible for keeping everything together. Now it just felt familiar. Like a line I had heard too many times to believe anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just said, I'll call you later, and hung up. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty after. That was when I knew something had actually changed. About a year later, I moved to Seattle. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't ask for his opinion. I just found a job, signed a lease, and left. The distance helped more than I expected. Not because it fixed anything, but because it gave me space to think without his voice being the loudest one in my head. For a while, I kept replaying everything. The emails. The timeline. That sentence. I couldn't let her take you away from me. Over and over. Trying to find a version of it that meant something else. Something less final. But there isn't one. And eventually, I stopped trying. He still calls. Not as often as before, but enough. Sometimes I answer. Sometimes I don't. When I do, I keep it the same every time. Short. Polite. Distant. He still says he loves me. Still says everything he did was for me. And maybe, in his mind, that's true. Maybe he really believes that what he did, whatever it fully was justified. That it was protection. That it was necessary. I don't know. I used to replay that moment over and over. The way he said it. The way I nodded like it didn't mean anything. For a long time, I thought staying made me weak. Like I should have left sooner. Said something. Done something. But the truth is, if I had left earlier, I never would have known. I would have spent the rest of my life defending him. Protecting him. Carrying a version of him that didn't exist. And maybe that's the part that unsettles me the most. Not what he said. But how easily I believed everything before it. How normal he made it feel. Now, when he says, everything I did was for you, I don't argue. I don't correct him. I don't even react. I just let the silence sit there, and then I hang up. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty when I do. Because whatever he thinks he protected, it wasn't me. So I don't know. Was I wrong for staying long enough to hear the truth, and then walking away without doing anything about it?